Hi, I'm David Dramm. I'm a composer, originally born outside of Chicago, grew up in California, and have been living in the Netherlands for almost 35 years. There were really two things that led me to be desperate enough to give up like everything and, get on a plane and move to Europe with my girlfriend. We just had tourist visas at the time, But the two things that really were super fascinating to me were, one, I had met this Dutch composer, Rodrigues, already in the early 80s, before he was really known anywhere outside of Holland. And they were playing his music in a music festival, which had all sorts of well-known composers. And the tallest one was Louis. And I remember hearing his music, and it was this mix of Stravinsky and bass guitars and electric guitars and saxophones. And I remember thinking, wow, that's pretty amazing music. I wonder where the Netherlands is. This typical California guy, right? 2 years later, I'm sitting in a classroom on the East Coast, and in walks that guy, Louis Andriessen, and he's there to guest teach for a semester. And so we spent 3 months drinking whiskey. He taught me how to roll cigarettes, playing poker, and talking about the meaning of life and music. And it was an amazing 3 months in my life because Louis was somebody who was so central to the whole music scene in Holland that nobody could imagine not seeing him for 3 months. So they all came to this little town, New Haven, Connecticut. Conductors, choreographers, filmmakers, musicians, and they would be there. So I met the whole art scene of Holland just in those 3 months in New Haven. And the second thing that happened was that at the time, I was writing this super avant-garde, microtonal, noisy music. And it got programmed at a festival in Germany, Darmstadt, which was the main festival for modern music. And so I sold my record collection, I bought a plane ticket, and I went there to hear my piece played. And at Darmstadt, it was a kind of click in a way that I met people my own age who were writing music full time. And this is something that I just didn't know in the States. So I was really intrigued by people that were walking around writing music full time, getting commissions, knowing a lot of musicians. And at the same time, my own music had really changed from the time that my piece had gotten programmed in Darmstadt to the music that I was writing then. We had been living in Los Angeles, and so I really got into this postmodern, like mixing up historical quotes and writing in a way kind of super simple music. And that piece got played at Darmstadt too. And a few measures into the piece, everybody in the balcony from Germany and from France and from Italy stood up and they started throwing things at my pianist. And all the people from the States and England and Canada stood up and they started clapping. And so it was like a little mini riot that happened. And I thought, wow, making music in Europe, this is like the greatest ever. So this little mini riot I thought was just like amazing. And I wanted to be a part of it. People really cared about it. For me, the main difference between the US and working in Europe is the distance between the cities. When I was a young composer, I would get on a plane from LA, spend all the money that I earned from my royalties or from the commission to fly to New York City or to fly to Chicago or something like that to hear a piece played. And it was very much something that at the time, it was like looking from the outside in, The whole Dutch music scene was very much connection not only between musicians and composers, but also between choreographers and filmmakers and theater makers. Everybody knew each other. And when I first showed up in Amsterdam, I would be out with Andriessen and with his students 3 or 4 nights a week, not only going to concerts, but also going to dance performances, going to experimental theater venues. And after every show, you did something which was unknown in the States, and that is you went to the cafe that was right next to the hall, and you hung out and you talked with the people that made it. And so this connection between all these different art forms, hanging out not only with musicians, but also hanging out with people from dance and from film and from theater, was something I found super inspiring. And when my daughter was born, I got this crazy idea, like what would it be like to earn my living as a composer just within biking distance of my house? And that's not something you think about when you live in the States. You know, in life you take these routes, these forks, one way or the other, and it's really impossible to know what would happen if you had taken the other one. Moving to Europe in 1989, right before the fall of the Berlin Wall, there were borders that were disappearing all over the place. Things opened up in an incredible way, politically and economically, but at the same time, the Netherlands had a real support system, as did the rest of Europe for the arts. So I kind of jumped in to the best of both worlds, that on one hand, things were changing, things were opening up in terms of like being able to get around and travel. And at the same time, the support that was coming out of the 80s and the 90s for art was at a real high point. And so for me, the idea of being able to jump around, doing multidisciplinary kind of things, being able to work in music theater, being able to have a band going out on tour and playing like in a club in Vienna or a club in Prague, you know, or Bratislava, all these places, going to Finland, going to Estonia, during all of these changes was a really exciting time. So if I hadn't done all that, if I had stayed in the States, wow, I don't know. It would have been a completely different kind of life. And hopefully amazing things would have happened there, but who knows? So when I first got to Amsterdam, I didn't really have any work lined up, except that I had a connection to the Dutch music publisher, Donemus. And this was doing a job that doesn't even really exist anymore. And that is copying out all the parts for the individual musicians in an ensemble or an orchestra. You take a big, score, and it starts with the flutes up at the top, and it goes all the way down through the brass, and you get down to the strings at the bottom. Well, somebody has to copy out all the notes for the individual musicians. And I learned an incredible amount that way, about composing and about orchestration and about notation. That was really part of my school in a way. But going out and meeting all these people, going out to concerts and dance performances and things like that, then it turned out that my first real Dutch gig was writing for a dance company. And this dance company gave me a commission to write for 2 different choreographers on the same evening. So the music was mine, but the choreographer split the evening between before the intermission and after the intermission. And I remember going in to with my music every morning to the rehearsal, and I would hand one cassette tape to one choreographer and a cassette tape to the other choreographer, and they were going and they would listen, and one would completely understand like the structure of the music and the tempo of the music and everything. it was super easy. And with the other one, it was less so, But in the end, what I learned was working with different kinds of personalities, people that have different ideas of when they're listening to your music and different reactions to your music, is an amazing way of learning your music better. And so this idea of working with people who are not musicians and finding out how their brain works when they're listening to it was something that was, for me, incredibly educational. And I've learned probably as much from how filmmakers and choreographers and theater makers hear my music as from the performers that played it. My fantasy, when I was 10 or 11 or 12, was that I had a Mustang convertible, and that I ran around with my band and played gigs and toured and made records. But it was always also still connected to that idea of writing songs for other people. And this is something that even like Jagger and Richards did, David Bowie did. They would write songs for other people. Bowie was working with Iggy Pop, he was working with Mata Hoople. He was writing songs for all these different people. And I thought that was a very cool aspect to it as well. Always still that idea of what would another singer do with that song? How could you write the perfect song for that person? And so for me, it was always a combination of those things. And it was really only later on that when I got the bug that it would be cool to write for orchestra, or it would be cool to write for music theater and these kind of things, that all of a sudden you take even more of a kind of bird's eye view to the whole thing. You're actually kind of watching it and listening to it from the same seat that the audience is in. And this kind of zooming out and seeing and hearing what's happening on stage eventually became close to like writing for film or writing for theater, where you're writing for scenes, you're writing for characters. And so instead of imagining what it was like writing for a singer, then all of a sudden you're writing for a character in a film. You're writing for a scene, or you're writing for like the lighting and the decor, right? And this really opened up my whole outlook on composing, that I was no longer writing just sounds, parts for musicians, but I was actually writing entire environments. I was writing parts of stories.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget, there's more to watch.